All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our most recent financial check-in webinar, which the topic for this month is raising financially savvy kids, which we felt that April as Financial Capability Month was a wonderful time to really highlight this topic, which we think is critically important. My name is Mary Dyer, and I'm a Financial Education Officer at FAME, and I also serve as volunteer president of the Maine Jumpstart Coalition for Personal Financial Literacy. Want to just remind you that this is part of an ongoing series of webinars that we're offering to support you. And at the end of this session, I will highlight the upcoming webinars that we have available as well. So thank you so much for joining. Again, those of you who just joined, please use the chat feature to ask any questions that you have. And Martha Johnston, who is the Director of Education, will be fielding those questions and will pause throughout to check in with you and see if we can address any of those. So my goals for today, and again, you're all here. So our first goal is sort of around making the case and really, providing some statistics around why this topic is so important. You're all here, so we're not going to belabor that point. But I will share a couple of stats that I think are relevant as to why introducing financial concepts early and often in a child's life and into adulthood is so critical. Then we'll talk a little bit about the role of families and how parents and caregivers and families are such key influencers in teaching children about money and financial decision making. Then we'll also talk a little bit about where to begin. I know a lot of parents and caregivers are really unsure, sort of where do I begin? What topics do I address? And there's some great free resources out there to help you get started. We'll also talk about sort of what to teach and when, and some resources available related to that as well. And then really the major focus of the presentation is to give you sort of some tips for success or some rules of thumb, if you will. And these are really things that financial experts have developed over time. Certainly they are tips that our college access and financial education team and our education team members have pulled together as parents and as educators, things that we really feel are very effective in teaching children about this concept, regardless of where they're at in their life cycle. And then I'll leave you with free resources, and that's a really important part. We want to leave you with some free tools and resources to help you get started and supplement what you're doing. So with that, I just also want to let you know, for those of you who aren't familiar with FAME, just give you a little bit of background in terms of who is FAME. We are a quasi-independent state agency who works to provide financial solutions to help Maine people achieve their business and higher educational goals. I serve on the education team at FAME, and I'm part of the college access and financial education team, which I know many of you are familiar with. And I think the big thing that I want to let you know about our team is we are available at any time to support you and your students or your child, again, depending on why you've joined us today. And so please reach out to us. I will be providing at various points throughout the presentation resources that are available through FAME, and Martha will be sharing links throughout the presentation in the chat as well. So we just want you to be aware that and let you know that we're here and we're available for you both in the classroom and in support of your family. And we're so thrilled to have you. So again, you're all here, so I don't have to belabor sort of why this topic matters, but just a couple of statistics that I think are really relevant. Each year, FINRA actually conducts a US financial capability study, and they look very closely and survey individuals within each state. And they're really looking at gathering sort of knowledge and behavior, financial behavior levels across the country. And there's a number of different statistics that they gather through survey data, but these are the three that sort of I think are most compelling that I wanted to call out. And the first is that 45% of Mainers do not have an emergency savings. So nearly 50% of Mainers report that they do not have a rainy day fund. And as we've seen in this environment with the economic impact of the pandemic, of course, this is being felt very profoundly right now. And so I think that's just to call out that statistic. In addition, 18% of Maine households indicated that they spent more than they earned. So this really is getting at that living paycheck to paycheck. 34% of Mainers reported that they were only paying the minimum due on their credit card. And so this comes as no surprise. If you don't have emergency savings, obviously turning to credit cards is a common way of covering those unexpected expenses. And so that outcome in that first bullet, that's not at all surprising. The other study that I think is, one that is very interesting to take a look at is and it's not each year, it's actually a study that's done periodically. And it's a global study of 15 to 16-year-olds, and they're looking at proficiency in a number of different areas, and financial proficiency is one that they address. They also look at math skills and reading skills, but financial proficiency was added a few years back. And essentially, out of 21 participating countries, the US ranks 6th out of those 21 countries in terms of overall financial proficiency. And it was determined through that study that 16% of students in the US didn't reach the baseline of proficiency. So I think, again, that is a study by the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center. It's the PISA study. And Martha will share the link there if you want to do a deeper dive into that. So again, not going to belabor this. You're here, you get it. Many of you are educators. Those of you that are parents know the importance of this topic. So we'll move right on, but there's a lot of research and data out there as to why this matters so much. So in terms of the role of the family, despite the fact that we know that this is a critical topic, one thing we also know is there are a number of studies that have told us that parents and caregivers are still very, very reluctant. Talking about finances at home is still somewhat of a relatively taboo subject, not only in the home, but just in general in our lives, in our workplace. We don't sort of wear a badge in terms of what we earn and what we spend. It still is something that we keep very private. And in fact, 3 out of 10 parents have indicated that they would rather talk to their child about the birds and the bees than money, which I find quite a staggering number. In addition, 2 out of 5 would rather have a conversation about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. So again, there's still quite a bit of resistance because most of us were not raised in environments where money is a topic that is for the dinner table. I think the reason for that for many parents and families is, certainly first and foremost, it's the lack of their own knowledge and confidence. Many don't probably, in all cases, feel like they had a good foundation. They perhaps didn't have a personal finance course while they were in school. Again, it's still seen as somewhat of a taboo subject. There's a lot of shame and stigma that goes along with talking about money and spending and financial behaviors and decision making. And, for many families, their own financial situation might not be in the best shape. They might not feel like they have their own financial house in order. So to talk about it really reveals some things that they might not feel comfortable about. So I think it's not a huge surprise. However, despite those statistics, parents and caregivers are still considered the primary and greatest influencer in terms of establishing financial behaviors and decision and knowledge for children. Most of us, good or bad, adopt our financial beliefs and habits from our families. So despite the fact we aren't feeling comfortable about it, that's where we're really learning it from. Now, in addition to the family, parents, if your children are not learning it from you and at home, where else might they be learning about financial decision making? Peers. So, and again, as you look at these alternatives, some of these might be good influences and others not so much. So, obviously your children are learning from their friends and their peers about money and what it means in society and sort of spending habits and behaviors and beliefs. Certainly there's a lot of influence on television and through social media, certainly the internet and music and pop culture, everywhere there are money messages that your children are absorbing. Certainly other family members, lots of information is coming to your children from other family members and from their community. And so those are kind of some ways that they're learning about money. Perhaps some of you have children who are learning at school. If you're unsure what is happening in terms of curriculum at your school, I think it's a great question to ask. In Maine, personal finance and economics is required in the learning standards. So we have in Maine what is called the Maine Learning Results, and they're really the learning standards, I think is another way to refer to it. And essentially, personal finance and economics is included and required at all grade levels in Maine. Now, we are what is defined as a local control state. So there isn't a course police or a curriculum police, if you will, that comes into schools and asks, what are you doing? How are you meeting the standards? It's really left up to the school and the local district to implement those standards. However, if you're unsure whether or not your high school, if you have a child in high school, whether or not their school is offering a personal finance course, it's a great question to ask. It's a great conversation to start at any level. How is your child being exposed to personal financial education? And I think it's really a relevant question. Now, one of our valued partners is an organization called Next Gen Personal Finance. And they are a national nonprofit whose entire focus is to support Maine teachers, not just Maine teachers across the country, but they certainly support Maine teachers. And every year they do a national access report, which sort of takes the pulse of what students in America have access to. And they look at each state. And so their most recent study, I thought you might find this interesting, is that 18% of Maine students attend a high school with a semester-long standalone personal finance course that's required. So 18% of students in Maine are at a high school that personal finance is required as a standalone semester course. Now, 44% have access to a semester-long course as an elective. So it's not required, but it's an elective course. 33% have personal finance and economics content embedded into another course. And commonly that might be social studies, it might be a math course, it might be a business or career course, it could be family consumer science. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that districts are embedding content into courses, but 33% of students have access to that. And then approximately 4% was determined to have no access to either of those things. Next Gen Personal Finance has a mission. They call it their Mission 2030, and their goal is that every student across the country in every state have access to a semester-long personal finance course that's required for graduation. So I just thought you might find that interesting in terms of access here in Maine. So if your student doesn't have access to personal financial education in school, or they're certainly not getting that information necessarily at home or in other methods that I've talked about, how do most of us learn? And the reality is, unfortunately, for many of us, it's by trial and error. That is commonly how most of us learn our money lessons, is by life experience and by making mistakes and learning over time. So that's really the most common way. So where to begin? Where do you begin as a parent? And one of the things you'll notice that I didn't do in this presentation is to break it up by age level of the child. Certainly there's things you're going to be doing when they're a toddler or pre-K or kindergarten that's very different in terms of your conversations in middle school and high school and beyond. We don't really have enough time to dive into each individual age band. And the reality is that what you teach your child and the conversations you have, in my experience, isn't really dictated by their chronological age or what grade they're in. There are kindergartners who are really ready to dive into some of these financial topics, and some children, it takes a little bit longer. The other thing is that it's really an incremental approach. You're not going to, in one given year, teach them everything that they need to know about personal finance. You would never teach algebra or math in 1 year. It's really something that's incrementally taught over time, you build upon. So you'll see as we move through the presentation, I'm not breaking it out based on age group, but I know a lot of parents and families wonder sort of, where do we even begin? How do we tackle this, what seems like a really big topic? So let's talk a little bit about that. I think one of the best first steps is to really begin to think about and examine your own attitude and the language that you use around money. Really think about your own money mindset. And this is really an area of study that I am so always fascinated the more I learn. Think about your money mindset as sort of your own unique set of core beliefs that really dictate your financial behaviors and attitude. It's really how you think about money in terms of how it functions in the world. Think about that money mindset. I think this is really important. Really, the whole psychological aspect of money is so much, I think, more critical and important than just knowledge. Knowledge is one thing in that, we want to teach sort of the foundational concepts to our children, but they also need to understand, and it's important for families to understand, that the emotions that we have tied to money and our behavior is oftentimes much more powerful than the knowledge. We know we need to save, we know we should budget, we know these things factually, but sometimes our mindset and our behaviors and our emotions can get in the way and really trip us up in terms of being successful. Again, this is an entire, there's a whole body of literature and research and work and resources around this. Some of the free there's a free resource that I want to provide to you, but there's some great books out there. A couple of them that I want to recommend. There's a book called Loaded, which is by Sarah Newcomb, and she's actually from Maine. She received her PhD from the University of Maine. She's now a behavioral economist for Morningstar, but she wrote the book Loaded, Money, Psychology, and How to Get Ahead Without Leaving Your Values Behind. And it's a really great book because it helps the reader to really examine how their money mindset and their emotions and their family background can sometimes be a powerful and strong driver of how they manage their money. The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, another great book. There's also a podcast that's available on Loaded, and Sarah, she has a blog as well. So I would encourage you to check these out if this is a topic that you'd like to do a deeper dive into. Also, there is a tool called Enrich, which is a digital financial wellness tool powered by Fame. And they have a Your Money Personality tool. So it allows you to go in and answer a series of questions to help you get a handle on what your own individual money mindset is. So I encourage you to take a look at that. That's free. And I think it's a great way to kind of get you started in terms of your money mindset and what kind of messages you might be conveying in the household and to your family. The other thing to think about is that, we think of teaching our kids about money as this sort of purposeful, we set aside time to teach them about money. Today we're going to learn about money, but that isn't really how it works. The reality is you're teaching about money and concepts around financial decision-making, whether you know it or not. It's really something that's sort of embedded in your day-to-day life, and you're teaching about money even when it's not so much on purpose. I think the other thing that's important, and I mentioned this earlier, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be perfect with money. You don't have to have everything, sort of all of your ducks in a row and this great rainy day fun and everything's wonderful. You don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be an expert to have these conversations. I think one of the most powerful strategies is to share your own stories, storytelling and sharing your own financial decisions that you've made with your child. Even mistakes, even the ones that you might be embarrassed about, can be really, really powerful and a great way to teach your child about, decisions that you've made along the way and how they've impacted your life. So again, think about those things, your mindset, you don't have to be an expert, and you're teaching all the time, whether you know it or not. Now I'm going to pause here and just want to check with Martha to see if we have any questions or comments.
We do not.
Okay, great. So, again, I've touched on this along the way, starting as early as possible. And again, you're doing this anyway. For those of you who have younger children, you're teaching some of those foundational concepts without really talking about money. Every time that you force your toddler to wait for something, to exhibit patience, self-control, a lot of those lessons, you're not teaching about money, that delayed gratification, all of those things. Those early lessons really do set the foundation for their future behavior and decision-making around money. But I do think as they get a little bit older, try to begin to think of ways that you can think out loud. So as you're making sort of financial decisions in your own mind, whether it's on a shopping trip or you're working on your budget at the dining room table, or you're looking at the sales circular and trying to figure out, or you're making a grocery list or a holiday gift list, whatever that may be, take those internal conversations and voice them out loud with your child. Talk about the financial decisions that you're making and why you're making them. It's all about show versus tell. Show them versus just kind of telling them and teaching them. And again, you're already doing this. This is already something that you're doing every single day. I think the other thing that's really important is to explain kind of what things cost and what it would take to pay for them through work earnings. So one of my favorite things, I still do this with my children. I have a 16-year-old and a 21-year-old, but I've been doing it all along. When they ask for something, and maybe it's a video game, which, the latest and greatest video games can run $60 a pop, telling them, this is how many hours I have to work for me to be able to buy you that video game. Or even better, if they're a teenager and they have a job and they're making minimum wage, how many hours would it take for you to be able to purchase that item? How many hours of work? You have to make it relevant. I was talking to my 16-year-old just yesterday about, future income. We were talking about being an electrician and, what electricians make. And, I said, depending on the program, right out of high school, some electricians can make, $50,000. And he said to me, is that a lot? So he's 16 and he lives with me. And yet he doesn't have that relatable context in terms of what that means. He wanted to buy something recently that was $120. And I said, well, at $12 an hour, that's 10 hours of work. So make it relatable, because these big, obscure numbers mean very little, even to teenagers, even to young adults. You really have to make it relatable. The other thing is to really try to get the entire family involved. If you are, in a situation where there's another parent in the household, certainly trying to be on the same page in terms of your money messages and your financial behaviors, it's not a bad idea. I have a colleague who implemented a wonderful strategy of having family meetings, literally a family meeting once a month to talk about a variety of topics, but perhaps it's to talk about goal setting or savings or, just there's all kinds of financial topics that you could focus on. And we'll touch on some of those as we move through. So what to teach and when? This is another topic that can be challenging. What are the things that your child needs to know and when? A wonderful resource, another one of our partners who has developed some phenomenal youth financial capability tools is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Martha's going to, again, as we move through, share the links, but they have established 3 key building blocks to achieve financial capability. Building blocks sort of build upon each other. So there's executive functioning skills. These are those early skills that I mentioned earlier. Juggling multiple tasks, planning ahead, making a plan, remembering information, self-control, delayed gratification. Again, those are lots of those things that you're teaching them when they're really little, and you can't, really begin to talk about savings and investing yet, but it's all of those early foundational skills. Then you'll move as they're a little bit older into sort of the financial habits and norms. And think of these as sort of the rules of thumb and routine practices, sort of the rules to live by. And then lastly, you'll begin to introduce financial knowledge and decision-making skills. Now, if you visit the CFPB website, because again, we don't have time to deep dive into all of these, but I want to show you on their website, if you go to each of the building blocks, they break out each of the various ages and sort of what are the milestones for that executive function. And this is the executive function one. They go into each of the building blocks and then kind of what it looks like in adulthood. So this is a wonderful tool. In addition, they also have a money milestones tool. With each of these, there are activities, conversation starters, free resources. So really some wonderful tools to help you introduce these topics. Now, for those of you who joined us who are educators, and even parents, if you want to go even deeper into the topic, the National Jumpstart Coalition also has a set of financial capability standards. And so it breaks out different age ranges and establishes sort of these milestones or benchmarks of financial knowledge for each stage. So certainly check that out if it's something that you want to take a closer look at. But I think CFPB has put together some great resources for parents to help you get started. All right, so I'm going to pause real quick, Martha, and just double check for comments, questions. Again, for those of you who have, as we move through the tips, especially any feedback that you have about these tips, strategies, things that you've done as a parent or an educator, we really do want to hear from you. I think this webinar will be made richer by your feedback.
So we've got a quiet group so far, but I'm monitoring closely and we're sharing the links as you mentioned them. And then some I'm sharing. And if you're not sure what it applies to, just send me the chat and I'll explain it.
So the tips for success, and again, these are just sort of our top list of things that we want you to consider, again, gathered through feedback from our team. Those of us who are parents and experts and educators, things that we think are great places to start, again, those rules of thumb. And I've already talked about money mindset when it comes to you as a parent, caregiver, or educator, but I think that a great and probably one of the most important tips is to help your child or young adult begin to think about their own money mindset. So again, a set of beliefs that really drive their attitudes and behaviors. And so it's that emotion, it's that psychology. I think it's really important for them to begin to understand that. I'm sure many of you who are parents have already begun to notice, even with young children, that your child has developed sort of a money mindset. I have observed children very young when we're in the classroom, really as early as second and third grade and younger, who already have this well-established sort of saver versus spender personalities, that sort of conservative versus, sort of ready to spend the money they have. If we have time at the end, I might share with you a quick video that is the ever famous marshmallow test. If not, we'll share the link at the end. But it's a really great video that shows that sort of delayed gratification with kindergartners who are given that marshmallow and told, you can eat this marshmallow, or if you wait and you don't eat it, we'll give you 2 marshmallows. And so then the proctor leaves the room and lets the child wait. And so the video is them sort of patiently waiting, and some just eat the marshmallow and some are patient. But you'll notice that children establish these sort of behaviors and sort of this mindset very early on. There are some studies out there that talk about birth order being a factor, that firstborns tend to be more conservative or, that sort of thing. There's also other studies that say the opposite. So I don't know that birth order is a major predeterminer, but you may find that in your own lives if you have multiple children. I think it's an interesting study, but I think money mindset is so huge. So I would encourage them, regardless of their age, to begin looking for money messages in their life. So whether it's on television or on the internet or in their community, really start to think about money messages. And I think marketing campaigns are a great way, if they're watching TV or they're on the internet, I think some of the marketing campaigns that are out there are a great way to have them sort of take a look at that. I love my iPhone and I love Apple, but I will say nobody does it better than Apple in terms of grabbing a hold of your emotions to convince you that you need to buy that latest $800 phone. There's no doubt, I think they do it better than anybody. Usually I end up crying at the end of the video, and I'm convinced that if I don't have that new video tool or camera, I just won't have those family memories. MasterCard did it beautifully years ago. The son and the dad and the son at the baseball game, and $100 for the tickets, and $50 for the merch, and $25 for the hot dogs. Unforgettable family memories, priceless, so that separating you from your money is this emotional thing that you must do, and you're paying for this experience. So you want your child to begin to identify with those and really connect with those. I think it's also a really great idea to have them begin thinking about how they feel emotionally when they receive money versus when they spend money or when they give money. I think that's a really powerful thing to get them thinking about. How do they feel when they have that interaction with money? And then I think the other thing is to talk about their peers and influencers in their lives and their communities. And this really gets to that concept of sort of keeping up with the Joneses or the millionaire next door. It's that whole idea that be careful about appearances. So, I often say to students in the classroom, you have people in your lives, no doubt, who look like they might be rich or have lots of money. Like they look like they have lots of money because they have lots of things. But that really isn't a determinant of financial security. They may have lots of things and a big house and cars and snowmobiles and all of that, but perhaps they don't really have a lot of money because they're in a lot of debt. So to really encourage them to think about that outward appearance versus reality. And that notion of it's not what you make or earn, it's what you spend. So take a look at that and begin to get them thinking about that. This is one of my favorite ones, although I will confess as a parent, I was terrible at this. I struggled with the concept of allowance. Not so much the working, but the whole concept of an allowance. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, the part I struggled with. But another great tip is to use allowances and work to help teach good money habits. That is a critical skill. So the first tip, when my kids were younger, I was really good at this, and that is utilizing a reward chart. And many of you probably already do this. I know a lot of teachers do in their classrooms, where over time you're earning rewards for a bigger reward. So this is a great thing with preschoolers and younger kids, building a reward chart so that over time they can, set a goal and meet sort of certain minimum steps or rewards along the way to achieve that goal. And the reward chart can be lots of things. It can be lots of behaviors or chores or things like that. Reward charts are a great visual way to reinforce some of those executive functioning skills. And then as they get a little bit older, again, depends on your child, using an allowance to help them track chores and earnings is a great way. And what I struggled with, and there's a lot of conflicting thoughts, which is, I think, why I really struggled. So some experts feel that you shouldn't link allowance to chores, with the theory that children should be required to pitch in without getting paid for every little single thing that they do. So that's probably what I struggled with. Just giving them money as an allowance for no reason versus an allowance that was tied to chores. Others believe that using an allowance for repayment of duties is a great thing to establish because they need to learn that they're not going to get something for nothing, and that work results in pay, and that pay can be used to help them achieve their goals. I think probably what I should have been better at or done with my own kids is kind of a blend. So perhaps, a weekly allowance and then additional chores where they could earn extra money. So that, probably would have been a better approach for me, but I could never quite sort out the balance between, you're going to take the trash out and do the dish, empty the dishwasher, not do the dishes, goodness knows. Empty the dishwasher, take the trash out, make your bed. Those are basic things, and I'm not going to pay you for them. That I just never could quite get my head around that. But if you do these things over and above, you'll get an allowance. So, you can kind of look at it either way. If you're wondering how much to give them and what's appropriate, a rule of thumb that a lot of experts recommend is you give them $1 a week for each year chronological age. So if they're 8 years old, for example, they get $8 a week. If they're 10 years old, $10 a week. That's kind of one way to approach it. So that's a great strategy. I think the other thing, and I was much better at this, as early as possible, encouraging your teenager to get a job. I think there's no better way to learn, good financial habits early in life than to just get a job and start earning money. Studies show that teens who work establish better financial habits earlier in life. They certainly learn about taxes a whole heck of a lot earlier, and money taken out of their tax or out of their paycheck. They're learning to juggle certainly multiple tasks while at work. So there's a lot of great soft skills and life skills that they're learning. But just in terms of giving them an opportunity to interact with money, I think the big thing is giving them a chance to interact with money while it's safe. Even if it means overspending and buying some ridiculous item, giving them a chance to do that. One tool I didn't include in the links that Martha is showing that I thought about after, and we can share it at the end, or maybe you can go grab it, Martha. There is a debit card for children that's called Greenlight Kids. And it's a debit card that parents can establish to pay allowances and give their child a chance to work with a debit card. Again, I haven't used it with my kids, so I'm not endorsing it necessarily, but it might be a good way to, introduce that debit card concept and that allowance concept. Any questions, Martha, before I continue?
No questions, and I did just share a link to the Greenlight.
Oh, great, thank you. I think it's a really cool idea. I haven't tried it, so again, not endorsing it, but I think the more that you can give children an opportunity to interact and use money and spend it, especially making mistakes, I think all the better. So obviously, one of the most important tips is to encourage saving and goal setting. And again, we've already touched on this throughout the presentation, but I think one of the great concepts to introduce to them is the notion of paying themselves first. And when I'm in a classroom, middle school, high school students really like this phrase. There's something about paying yourself first and taking care of your future self and your future goals first. And so really establishing that early habit of saving. Many families also have a family save jar, or they encourage their child when they're very young to have a piggy bank. Maybe when they're little, you have a piggy bank, they start saving their change. And then as they get a little bit older, establishing multiple jars. A great approach is to have them create 3 savings jars, one that's focused on giving, one that's focused on saving, and one that's focused on spending. And again, that helps them to really begin that idea of developing a spending plan and prioritizing and kind of establishing set categories of spending so that they really understand they need to set aside money for various things. Another thing I would encourage you to do is to visit your financial institution. Many banks and credit unions have wonderful saver programs for children and young adults. And I think connecting them with the financial institution to have them learn about banking in general, and again, take advantage of some of those savings programs and programs that are offered, I think are a great way. I think if they have, getting a savings account open for them and having them log in or see their running balance, having them become very aware of the amount that they have in their savings account and allowing them to see that build over time. The other thing that's critically important, and this isn't just about having money saved to pay for college. Opening a college savings account, we talked about psychology earlier. This is a very powerful psychological step to take for your child, in that children who have a college savings account are more likely to go to college, even if it's just a small amount. There's something very psychological and empowering about a child knowing that they have those funds that sets them on a path of education and training after high school being part of their path and a goal. So opening a college savings account is a great way to teach them about money. I think that encouraging family members to contribute, so rather than having them buy the latest and greatest video game, having them make a contribution into that savings account and making sure that your child is aware of that. And again, partnering with them so that they can see the earnings over time and the growth of that account. If you'd like to learn more about college savings opportunities, specifically 529s, a great website is savingforcollege.com. Virtually every state has a college savings 529 program. And so that website gives you an overview of plans across the country. Here in Maine, we have a 529 program that is called the Next Gen 529 college savings program. And you can visit nextgenforme.com. Martha's going to give you the link. That's our program in Maine, so I encourage you to check it out. There are some matching grants for Maine families who open accounts, not only when they open the account, but when they make additional contributions. So we encourage you to learn more about that if you're not familiar. So the next tip for success is, again, I keep saying these are all important. They're all important, but this one, absolutely. In addition to the money mindset, I think helping them to become an informed consumer is one of the most important steps. And this is one of the ones that you can really teach by thinking out loud and getting them involved in the decisions that you're already making on a day-to-day basis, but just getting them, to participate in that. Really encouraging them to get involved with you as you're comparison shopping, whether it's in the store or online. Exposing them and explaining discounts and promo codes and coupons. Maybe you sit down with the Sunday Circular every week and have them, cut coupons or look for sale items, maybe help you establish your weekly grocery list. Certainly, if you can take them shopping with you, and I know some of these strategies I'm going to recommend right now are a little tricky in the age of COVID, but once life returns to, the new normal, if you will, or even now, if you're able to take them shopping, I think it's a great way to expose them to that, those consumer skills. Certainly discussing unit pricing is a really strong, I think, concept for them to learn early on. Store brand versus name brand. This was one of my favorite ones because sometimes kids really latch on to the name brand, and we used to do blind taste tests. This I will say was as much for my husband as my boys. They were convinced that name brand was better, and so I would just blindfold them and make them try the alternative. And to this day, my son insists that the store brand Pop-Tart is better than Pop-Tart brand. Sorry, Pop-Tart. He actually gets irritated if I get him the Pop-Tart brand. So try that test out. I think that's a really fun thing to do with kids. Again, this other one in COVID is a little difficult, but using cash while shopping. I think one of the biggest hurdles for us now in this digital society that we're in is the fact that it's very hard for our children to make it relatable to them. We use debit cards. We're not using cash. We're not counting out our bills at the checkout counter. A lot of children and even teenagers have no idea what a debit card is. They just think of it as this abstract, money that's just an endless source of funds. And how is it different from a credit card and all of that? So I think really explaining what is a debit card, what is that thing you put into the chip reader each day, and ideally, if you can use cash, that's an even better way for them to learn. Actually, a lot of financial experts think that adults should use a cash method as a way to spend less money. So use cash while shopping. Perhaps you have them pay the cashier. Give them a sense of what you have available to spend and work along the way for them to, get a sense of that. I think another thing that's really fun with teenagers is to make it a household challenge to help them get the best deal. Help them, have them help you look at internet, cable, cell phones, car insurance, and make it a challenge to get that best deal. I'm going to pause here just for a moment. Martha raised her hand, so perhaps we have a question.
We got a great comment, and I just wanted to share that. Oftentimes in education, or at the education side of fame, if you will, we struggle with the word college because we know not everyone goes to college. And so we do try to train ourselves to say education after high school. And one of our participants had a really great suggestion. And she said, she uses the phrase, instead of college savings, she will often say extended education fund. And so I just wanted to share that because I think that's a really great way to phrase that. And it coincides with us always trying to figure out other ways to say education after high school. So we acknowledge the whole plethora of paths somebody can take.
I love that.
So
I love that. That's great. All right, so we're getting short on time, so I'm going to blast through the last bullets here because we've already talked about many of these. You know, delayed gratification, make them wait before they purchase something. If they receive money, you know, on their birthday and they're chomping at the bit to buy that item, make them wait. Talk with them about trade-offs, you know, which we also in the industry talk about as opportunity costs, but those trade-offs, if you buy this now or you wait, you know, you could purchase these items in the future. So really the weighing sort of those opportunity costs is important. Again, make it relevant, and, you know, make sure that they understand, you know, what does that item truly cost. And then just a quick note on internet and internet security and financial fraud. Those are great topics to introduce as well. Really, really important if you're working with them to build those online shopping skills. Another tip that I think is extremely valuable is to encourage them to develop their entrepreneurial spirit. So, you know, we talked a lot about work and you know, making sure your teenager gets a job. But this whole idea is around, you know, earning money and leveraging your skills and passions, perhaps separate from an actual, you know, part-time job. So having a conversation about their interests and their talents, what they love to do, what they're good at, what does the world need, you know, that kind of thing. Helping them think about a side job or a side hustle. You know, I knew a high school student years ago, I didn't know him personally, but I heard about him, who had an auto detailing company that he started really small, and then it grew so big he ended up paying for 4 years of college and hiring a staff to help him do it. You know, helping them link their interests to potential education or career pathways, future pathways, and then thinking about other ways to discover found money. That might be getting a better deal on internet, cable, cell phone, that kind of thing. Odd jobs. I'm a huge fan of found money. So perhaps it's yard sales, selling, you know, all that stuff they accumulated as a child. That's a great way to do that. A couple of resources Martha's going to share. One of our tools at FAME, we have a game online and classroom game called Claim Your Future, which is a wonderful career and financial decision-making tool. And then there's another tool that we love called Career One Stop that allows them to explore different careers and salary levels and a whole variety of information based on careers. And then again, we've touched on this, but really thinking about higher education, you know, that whole education and training after high school being a critical future step. Despite what you're hearing in the news and you know, a variety of places around crushing student loan debt and the cost of college, while those things are true in some cases, by every measure, we are better off pursuing training and education after high school than just high school diploma only. By every measure, whether it's our income levels, our overall health, our happiness, just our general financial freedom. So we want to certainly encourage that. We want to encourage an understanding in them of the benefits of education after high school, and be sure that we talk about multiple pathways. I mean, that's something we are very focused on at FAME, making sure that students understand that there isn't a one path. It could be a 4-year degree. It might be a 2-year degree. It could be a military option, an apprenticeship, certainly a trade. I mean, there's lots of ways to receive those skills and training and education so that you can participate in a vibrant economy in the future. And so we want to be sure to encourage that. Again, not so easy in COVID, but take your child to work. Give them an opportunity to be exposed to people in their day-to-day work lives so that they can kind of see what a day in the life looks like. If your child is in high school, beginning a conversation around college costs and your ability to contribute as a family, talking about the impact of student loans. Certainly we have a ton of resources and expertise and assistance around this area. Our FAME education, information on our website, our college access team. We have animated videos, publications, just a ton of resources to help you with this topic. Presentations, webinars, all of those things to help with that piece. And then The last tool tip that I want to share, really, and it's my favorite, is to make it fun. You know, to make it a game and to make it fun. To really to encourage this sort of this family game night option, for example, is something that your children to begin to rely upon. There's a lot of wonderful games that teach a lot of important financial concepts. There's just a few listed here. We're Monopoly people in my house. I have a colleague who said she has like 30 versions of all the various Monopoly games. So Monopoly, certainly the game of life. Having that family game night is a really fun way to introduce financial concepts and make it interesting and fun. There also are a ton of online games. We talked about Claim Your Future. Next Gen Personal Finance has an arcade full of a ton of online games. I talked about making savings a competition. You know, certainly if you have multiple children, or a family savings competition is a great way to make it fun. And then also to consider matching their savings. So maybe it's a competition and whoever wins gets a match, you know, to really add that additional incentive. But making it fun as often as possible is a really great way to take away some of that, again, that sort of seriousness of this topic, and maybe taking away some of that reluctance that you might have to talk about your own financial situation. And then last but not least, I want to leave you with some of the free resources that are available out there. Again, Martha's been sharing a ton of them throughout the presentation, but there are, as you've seen, numerous digital and online resources. Again, check with your financial institution because they are a wonderful resource in your community in terms of teaching your young child or young adult about money. The Maine Jumpstart Clearinghouse is available, and this is basically a clearinghouse of financial education resources and providers in the state that are available as well. We talked about the CFPB and their youth financial education tools. They also have a Money on the Bookshelf series, which uses children's literature as a way to teach about money. And then they have a book series called Money Monsters, which is a great set of new tools that they've developed. PBS Kids has great videos and tools as well. So there's tons of great resources to make it fun. FAME resources that I, again, have mentioned throughout. You do have access to Enrich, which is a free digital financial wellness tool. It provides you with tools, calculators, free courses, and that's available to you. We talked about Claim Your Future. Again, that's another free resource for you educators who have joined us. Your students can play online digitally, or you can request a free classroom game kit from us if you're a Maine teacher. So please check that out as well. Maine teachers and education-based nonprofits, because I know there's a few of those on the webinar today. We also have a publication called Manage, which is all about personal financial management and a lot of the topics that we talked about today. We also just recently launched a new program, which is a family financial education program called Invest in Me Reads. In this inaugural year of the program, we focused on second graders, but we'll continue to grow the program over time. So I encourage you to check that out. And then last but not least, we also have a series of coloring books for preschoolers through grade 2, and then workbooks for older students that feature cash and max, which are, I refer to them as our money ambassadors. But it's a series of workbooks and coloring books that focus on career, education and training, and money management. And so those might be some resources that you could share. Also, there's some great mobile apps out there as well. So if your child is someone who has a phone and they like to be on their phone, there's lots of great mobile apps that you might want to check out as well. Lastly, I want you to be aware of our upcoming webinars. This is again part of our financial check-in series. On May 7th, we'll be doing a session on balancing retirement savings versus savings for college. So I would venture to guess that there's a few of you out there who will find that to be a valuable session, and hopefully you'll be joining us. And then in June, we'll be doing a student loan repayment session. And there's a link there where you can check out those webinars. not only register for them, but also the recordings of previous webinars as well. And then final thoughts, and then I'm going to share that link to that marshmallow video in the chat. I'm not going to show the whole video because we're right at 1 o'clock now, but just some final thoughts. Remember, you're teaching about money whether you intend to or not, good or bad, you know, effective or not, you're teaching all the time these skills and concepts. Again, getting the entire family involved, making sure that you're offering up a consistent message is really helpful. Making it fun, undoubtedly use games, use fun activities as a way to introduce this topic. And remember, you don't have to go it alone. I shared a whole bunch of free resources that are available. And for those of you who are on the call, who perhaps you have a high school student or a college student, you're thinking, oh gosh, if you're like me, frankly, who you feel like you've gotten, you've got this older child who you feel like there's all of these things that you've yet to teach them, it's never too late. And certainly every skill and behavior that you can kind of share and those money stories, all of that is incredibly helpful well into adulthood. So it's never too early or too late. That last slide is just giving you the free resources that are available, the FAME education resources that I mentioned earlier. You can join our mailing list so that you'll get information about our upcoming webinars, and then my contact information is there as well. So thank you all so much for joining today. I really do appreciate it. And let's see, again, thanks so much for joining.